Hello, my name's Mike. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm going to react to and break down the opening scene of one of my films. The film is called The Outcasts. It's streaming now on PBS. There's a link below. It's part of the Life on the Line series. And this film, we filmed in Chad a few years ago. It's about women who are suffering from fistulas, which is something that can occur during difficult childbirth when a woman doesn't have access to healthcare. So real quick before we play the opening scene, what am I trying to establish here with the opening scene? First of all, I'm trying to establish the world that this film is going to inhabit. And for this, it's a fairly rural environment in the country of Chad, something pretty foreign to most Americans, which is the biggest audience for this film. I want to establish some of our main characters so that you can start following their story. I want to try and make it entertaining so you'll watch the rest of the film. And also we need to introduce the problem that this film is looking to address. It may not solve the problem, but we're addressing the problem. So let's watch the opening scene, then I'll come back, talk about it a little bit, and then we'll watch it again and break it down a little bit.
Aquilo aquele sabe ko non maka koning la kusine Estefan dagli manang pa ona kusung miang ga koning erle kolla kusung miang mare gon de koning chatam ka ekol bangna kusung miang sidi yung mana deng on korea jang sen egel bang mana hen ka degel bang kun se ay eding on madi mare yung ta bang tami na on na yung kang dina ti se malidin galtir juska bang sa agma ding on se yin yana galtir bang na aher on an kodir na ma ujing on se indi kodir bang on wudu dagel korai baisi on yai kon han dan kargina on se indi ka karg bang ma habde taima.
A vesicovaginal fistula is a hole that develops between your bladder and your vagina, and most often in developing countries it's from a difficult obstetric complication. Let's say the baby's head is trying to deliver and it gets blocked and it can't deliver, so it stays for hours, even days, not delivering, and then the tissue between the vagina and the bladder dies. It forms a hole in between, so the urine just leaks out.
Kor maka kusung China ana kalas ba kale katung bang kodrung len gusukang di kai bipi basa dingya bas on mayai ina ni kartam ni kam kurat ni cubra ma ka kusung na kelama asum kama hayung bang tami kul ma hayung kodrung kul ma hayung onit noa onit noa ma jiana on ma noa bija kama se boy kal ka tungya kama se asu ka changda.
For 2 years, Falmata lived with a fistula. Ostracized by her family, she had no money and no way to fix her problem.
Chubra ma agna on ma pel budige dan on ma say dan na chubra ma in kusung budige mas on ma pel dan jogur on ma pilye ma kushia tepka tamu on demna juska.
Imagine just being wet all the time. People don't even have money for regular clothes, let alone if they're wet all the time and they have to wash them. So then they go around smelling like urine. Oftentimes the husbands leave them. Oftentimes it was a result of a difficult delivery, so that baby died. Their family members get tired of taking care of them because they smell, and they can't get a job, they can't go to the market because nobody wants to be around somebody that smells like that.
Well, that's the opening scene. Yeah, wow, that is a lot to take in. I gotta say, I'm asking a lot of the viewer in this film. So I think we establish the problem fairly well. We establish some of our characters here. Let's talk real quick before we watch it again and break it down about how this kind of film came about and some of the issues that we had to deal with during pre-production and production. So the organization that I worked with and for quite a while asked me to make a film on this doctor and her family who had been in Chad for I think around 9 years at the time we filmed, and they were looking at maybe coming back to America in the next year or two. So they wanted to do something featuring them. So we got in contact with them. We talked to them about what are the biggest issues that they'd like to be told in stories like this, and Dr. Netteburg brought up the idea of fistulas. It's something that she was passionate about, something that she worked very hard to try and make a dent in this area of Chad. And so we thought about it, and I knew I had seen a great short documentary called A Walk to Beautiful, which was about fistulas. So I did a little research on that. I think it came out around 2007. So we were a decade plus past when that came out. I didn't see a ton of other films and stories about fistulas. So I thought, okay, this is still an issue. Let's go ahead and focus on that. So that's how we got that. Now, whenever a project like this comes to me, one of the big questions is why should I, middle-aged white guy from the suburbs, be telling this story? And the answer is difficult. I mean, I probably shouldn't be. It should be probably a local person who should be telling this story. So the way that I answer that, rightly or wrongly, is number one, I have access. I have access to the story here. We had access to the doctor. We had access to the hospital where we stayed at and we filmed. I've made films in Africa and other countries before, so I have experience. And hopefully I can capture a story that is relatable to my audience. And my audience is going to look more like me than the characters in my film. So I try to be very open and respectful of the culture of the people, and then capture a story and translate it to my audience that looks more like me, and hopefully tell a story that's impactful to some people, and hopefully those people will support efforts like this, and maybe one day this won't be a problem. So that's how I deal with the ethics of it, right? Rightly or wrongly, I don't know. Um, so technically, some of the issues when we make films like this, translation can be difficult. So for this film, we had a crew of three. It was myself, it was the DP Austin, and it was our field producer Katura. Great, great crew. So Katura came, helped us schedule everything, helped us get cars when we needed to go somewhere, and she would also every day after we filmed, I would go through our footage. I would mark the clips that needed translation. The next day, Katura would sit with a translator and go through those clips and translate them on scene, because we didn't have a good option for translating when we got back to the States. These aren't languages that are spoken widely. I'm sure we could have found people who would have translated for us, but for us, it just logistically made more sense if we did the translation on site. And we had two fantastic translators and really just community advocates for us for this film. It was, oh, they were amazing. So if you watch the film, watch the credits and say a little thank you to them for making this film possible. Okay, let's go back and watch the opening scene, and I'll stop and make some comments and we'll talk a little bit about it.
Jakelu. Jagel su sap ko ino on maka.
So with these first few shots, I'm just trying to visually introduce the audience to where we're at, which is someplace that probably looks very different from where the audience that's watching this film is familiar with. We shot this opening scene with two Panasonic GH5 cameras, little micro four thirds DSLR style cameras that are really great for lightweight travel. They're a few years old. They're better options now. We had one camera on a wider lens, I think a 12 to 35, and I think we had one camera on a 70 to 200. We were here for a little while filming this scene, and we had lots of options of good wide establishing shots, our medium shots, our close-ups, and our cutaways, so we could really visually, hopefully, take the viewer to where we're at here. The audio is from Falmata from an interview that we did, and then we'll cut to that interview later. We'll talk a little bit about it.
Koning na. Kusine Estefan. Jagli manang pa. Ona. Kusung miang ga koning erlo kolla. Kusung miang mare. Gon erdu koning chat tamka ekol bangna. Kusung miang sidi.
So this is her son's very first day of school. So she was very proud. She was very happy. And one of the things that I try to do when we're filming in different countries and different cultures, and I know that this is something that's going to need to translate back to an American audience or an audience similar to an American audience, is can I capture scenes that are very relatable? And I hope that a mother helping get her son ready to go to school is something that's very relatable. It may be very different the way she's doing it, but you know, getting your kid clean, getting them fed, making sure they have their school supplies and getting them off to school, I'm hoping is very relatable so that you start forming an attachment as an audience member to Falmata as a character in this film.
Yung mana deng on Korea jang sen egling i bang mana hen ka egel bang kun se ai eng eting on madi mare yung ta bang tami na.
So now what we're starting to do is juxtapose Falmata's story, which is pretty dark and pretty sad as a child, with the good childhood that she's trying to provide for her son. And we're also starting to introduce the problem of fistulas. So for this interview, we did two cameras, GH5s, the close-up and the wide shot, and we had a mic overhead, just overhead. It's we're using an Audix SCX1, I think it is. And we were just running that into the XLR input on top of the GH5 camera. Oh, and one light, the DP, Austin, fantastic job here. We lit it with one light, a flexible LED that takes up very small amount of space when we're traveling. So that worked out pretty good. This was a difficult room to film in audio-wise because we had cement floor. We were able to find a rug to put down, and then we had very reflective walls too. But I think it turned out pretty good.
Onap yung kang dinati say maliding geltir juska bang sa agma ding on say ini yana geltir bang na aher on ang kodir na ma ujing on say aindu kodir bang on wudu egel korai baisi on yai kon han ang kargina on say aindu ka karg bang nun ma habde time.
A vesicovaginal fistula is a hole that develops between your bladder and your vagina, and most often in developing countries, it's from a difficult obstetric complication.
So now we're introducing another character, Dr. Netteburg. She's the expert, so she can talk about all of the things that are difficult for regular people like me to understand. She can help explain things and help set up the problem of fistulas, and we'll also introduce her as a character.
Let's say the baby's head is trying to deliver and it gets blocked and it can't deliver, so it stays for hours, even days, not delivering, and then the tissue between the vagina and the bladder dies. It forms a hole in between, so the urine just leaks out.
Kormaka kusung China ana kalabak kale katung. Abang kodrung len gusukang di. Kayi bipi basa ingya bas on mayai ina nikartam. Nukam kurat ni.
We had, so the way we did this interview was I would ask a question. I was sitting behind our translator, and then our translator would ask that to Falmata. Our translator was fantastic and really made Falmata comfortable and allowed her to open up and tell her story in a very authentic way, I think. It worked very well. Another kind of issue that you have to try and deal with films like this is trying to not make it a white savior kind of film, so that, you know, the white person comes in and saves all the poor black or brown people from all those things. So we try and work around that. It can be difficult when, you know, we're dealing with a place where there aren't a lot of physicians, and so when you have someone from America who, or another country, who's willing to come and serve for a number of years, it's good. But it's something that, you know, we were aware of. We tried to not make this a white savior film, so hopefully we succeeded in that. Also, we're telling, you know, Falmata's really dark story so that we can also set up kind of a positive outcome. So that even though she's had a very difficult life, you know, you'll see later in the film that now she's in a much better place.
Chubrama ka kusung na kilama asung kama hayung bang tami kul mahayung kodrung kul mahayung onit noa ma jiana on ma noa bija kama se boy kal katung ya kama se asu ka changta.
For 2 years, Falmata lived with a fistula. Ostracized by her family, she had no money and no way to fix her problem.
Chubrama agna.
So here, just using some voiceover to help move the story along, done by the amazing Lisa Ling, making sure that we reinforce some of these ideas with the audience through voiceover, and yeah, and move the story along.
On ma pel budige dan.
Really kind of filling in gaps is what I try to use voiceover with. If we're missing something, if we need to reinforce an idea with an audience, that's what I think narration is probably best at for films like this.
Dan on ma say dan na chubrama kusung budige mas on ma pel dan jogur on ma pilye ma kushia tepka tamu on demna juska.
Imagine just being wet all the time. People don't even have money for regular clothes, let alone if they're wet all the time and they have to wash them. So then they go around smelling like urine. Oftentimes the husbands leave them. Oftentimes it was a result of a difficult delivery, so that baby died. Their family members get tired of taking care of them because they smell, and they can't get a job, they can't go to the market because nobody wants to be around somebody that smells like that.
So that's the end of the scene there. I really like how we ended it with kind of the voiceover that kind of retells very shortly the story of Falmata. We have Falmata talking about the practicalities of living with a fistula and what that is like. And then we have Dr. Netteburg coming in and retelling those issues and making it very clear what it's like for women who have fistulas. Okay, I want to jump in here real quick. I was editing, and there are two things I want to talk about real quick that I meant to talk about, and I didn't. The first is telling stories about people who don't really have power. So in this particular instance, Falmata is someone who has dealt with a fistula, dealt with issues with her family, but as well, she's a woman in a very patriarchal society, right? I'm not interested in telling stories about people in power. I'm interested in telling stories of people who don't have power and how they live in their everyday life. The other thing I wanted to talk about real quick is telling stories for nonprofits, for organizations, and how to show that impact. And I think that one of the best ways to do that is to see how many steps away from the organization you can get and still show the impact. So in this case, the organization is a medical organization in the United States who helps Dr. Netteburg. So we're going from the organization to Dr. Netteburg to Falmata's child. So at least 3 steps away. And I think if you can do that, if you can show the impact, if you can say, we worked with this doctor in America and she's impacting not only women in another country, but those children are now going to have much better lives because of that. I think that's a really powerful way to tell stories for nonprofits, for organizations. How many steps away can we get and still show that impact? Okay, back to it. So that's the opening scene. I think, I think it is pretty strong actually for this film. The visuals, we did a good job at. Austin, the DP, did an amazing job. I think this was his first big international work trip, and I think he was a little concerned. But it was kind of interesting. So they were based in California at the time. I was based in Florida. They booked some crazy flights for me, so I got to fly from Florida to Canada, and then I met Katura and Austin in Paris. My flight was a little late, so I got on my next flight, which was I think we went to Nairobi and then to N'Djamena in Chad. But my bags did not get on that flight, so I had a week without my bag in Chad in Africa. Second time, by the way, that it's taken my bag a week longer to get to Africa than it took for me to get to Africa. So whenever you're working on a project like this, make sure you pack a second pair of clothes in your carry-on and have everything that you need for your work in your carry-on, because there's a decent chance your bag's not going to make it, especially if you're flying through Paris. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed that. Watch the full film at the link below, streaming now on PBS, and subscribe, ask me questions below. Thanks for watching.